Yes, you. Hold these for a moment, would you? And keep my cocoa still while I get my photograph." I was close enough to hear her say it, close enough to see the little white dog squirming under one of her arms and the 4 glossy shopping bags swinging from the other, and I knew before the guard moved a muscle, which is to say, before he did not move at all, that I was about to watch something I would not forget. I had come to the forecourt of Halden House that morning for the same reason as everyone else pressed against the gilded railing, to see the men who do not flinch. I left having seen something better. I am still not sure I have the words for it, but I have the video on my phone, and I have told this story so many times now that my wife says I should just write it down. So here it is, exactly as it happened from where I stood. She was perhaps a few steps to my left, just inside the cordon line where the public was allowed to gather, and she had the unmistakable bearing of a woman who had never once in her life been told no and meant it. Expensive sunglasses pushed up into expensive hair, a pale coat that probably cost more than my car. The dog, Coco, apparently, was one of those tiny fluffed-up creatures that look permanently startled, and it wanted nothing to do with the arrangement she had in mind. She had decided, you see, that the guard standing his post at the foot of the steps would make an excellent prop, not a man, a prop, a bit of the scenery she had paid for with the price of her mourning. The guard did not so much as glance at her. He stood at the base of the broad stone steps, in the red tunic and the tall black bearskin white gloves crossed on the rifle, eyes fixed on some point above all our heads, as still as the carved lions on the gateposts. I would later learn his name, because the whole country would learn it within a week, but in that moment he was simply the soldier, the statue, the man whose entire profession is the refusal to react. "Hello," she said louder, snapping her fingers in front of his face the way you might to a waiter you felt was ignoring you. "I'm talking to you. Take the dog. I won't be a minute." A ripple went through the crowd around me. The kind of nervous, delighted murmur you hear when people realize they are about to witness either a great embarrassment or a great spectacle, and cannot yet tell which. Phones came up. Mine among them, I admit it. A few people laughed, the uncertain laugh of strangers who don't want to be the only one not laughing. He did not take the dog. He did not look down at the dog or at her, or at the bag she was now actually trying to loop over his forearm, hooking the ribbon handles against the polished buttons of his cuff. The bag slid off because his arm was not offered. They thumped onto the cobbles. The dog yipped, and the guard remained precisely as he had been, upright, forward, breathing so slow and shallow that I could not see his chest move at all under the wool. "Pick those up," she said to him, as though the bags had leapt from her own hands by some failure of his. "Those are designer. Do you have any idea what those cost? Pick them up and hold them properly. Honestly, what are you even here for if not?" She gestured at the whole forecourt, the steps, the great pale face of the house behind him. This is a tourist attraction. You're part of the tourist attraction." There was a man beside me, an older gentleman with a folded newspaper under his arm, and I heard him say, quietly, almost to himself, "The man is not your butler, madam." He did not say it loud enough for her to hear. I think he knew it would not have landed. People like that do not hear the word no until it arrives wearing a uniform of its own. I want to be fair to her because that is the only way to tell this honestly. She was not, I think, a cruel woman in the way you imagine villains to be cruel. She was something quieter and more common and, in its way, worse. A person to whom other people had simply stopped being entirely real. The waiter, the driver, the woman at the desk, the guard at the steps, to her they were functions, conveniences, parts of the machinery of a pleasant day that existed to make her day pleasant. She had no concept that the still red figure in front of her was a man with a name and a regiment, and a reason for standing exactly the way he stood. To her, he was furniture that had inconveniently developed an attitude. So she escalated. They always escalate in my experience when the world fails to rearrange itself around them. She bent, scooped up her bags with an enormous put-upon sigh, shoved them and the dog into the arms of a young woman traveling with her, an assistant, I assumed, who had been hovering miserably at the edge of all this. And then she stepped right up to the cordon, leaned across it, and put her finger an inch from the guard's nose. "I am speaking to you," she said, and her voice had changed. The pleasantness had burned off it. "You will look at me when I am speaking to you. Do you know who I am?" He did not look at her, and there is no describing what that stillness did to her. I have thought about it many times since. A person like that runs on being seen, on the small constant confirmation, in every glance and nod and hurried yes of course, that the world has registered her and adjusted itself accordingly. And here was a man 2 feet away who would not give her even that. Not contempt, which she could have fought. Not fear, which she could have enjoyed. Nothing. The flat, total indifference of a man doing his duty, for whom she did not register as an obstacle at all. It undid her. You could see it happen. Her face went from imperious to confused to genuinely, almost childishly furious, in the space of about 4 seconds, and the crowd's nervous laughter died because we all felt the air change. The older gentleman with the newspaper had stopped murmuring. Somewhere a child asked its mother why the lady was shouting, and the mother shushed it and drew it back. "Fine," the woman said. "Fine, you want to play statue. Let's see how still you can." And she swung her handbag at his head. I want to be precise here, because precision is the whole point of what happened next, and because the video, which has now been watched more times than I can comprehend, shows it frame by frame to anyone who pauses it. She did not flail. She did not slap. She drew the bag back over her shoulder, a heavy structured thing with a metal clasp and a chain strap, and she swung it in a full arc with real force, aiming for the side of his face beneath the bearskin's chin strap. It was not a gesture. It was a blow. She meant it to land, and she meant it to hurt, and she meant, I am sure of this, for it to finally make the man react. It landed. The clasp caught him across the cheekbone with a sound I can still hear, a hard, flat crack that carried across the suddenly silent forecourt. His head turned perhaps 2 inches with the force of it. A thin line of red opened on his cheek where the metal had bitten. And then he was still again. That is the part I cannot get people to understand when I tell it. She struck a man across the face with a metal-clasped bag, hard enough to cut him, and he did not stagger, did not raise a hand, did not so much as change the focus of his eyes. The bearskin settled. The thin red line welled and began, slowly, to track down toward his jaw. And he stood exactly as he had stood before she ever opened her mouth, as though the blow had been a leaf falling against a wall. For a moment nobody breathed. I have been in crowds that go quiet, and there are different kinds of quiet. There is the quiet of awe and the quiet of shock and the quiet of 100 strangers all silently agreeing that a line has been crossed and that something will have to be done about it. This was the third kind. The forecourt of Halden House, which had been all camera shutters and chatter and the soft, restless noise of a few dozen visitors, went utterly still, and into that stillness fell the small, absurd sound of the little dog whimpering in the assistant's arms. The woman herself seemed surprised by what she had done. The bag hung at the end of her arm. She looked at it, and then at the guard, and then, and this is the thing I think she truly never expected, she looked at the crowd, at us. And she found, where she had spent a lifetime finding deference or at least indifference, several dozen faces that had turned as one to look back at her, not laughing now, not delighted. The older gentleman had lowered his newspaper. A young father had put himself half in front of his children. And every single phone, including mine, was up and pointed and recording, the little red dots steady. And you could see the moment she understood that the indifference she had been raging against was not the guard's. It was hers. He had simply held a mirror up to it, and now the whole world was looking into it with her. He wouldn't move, she said, to no one, to all of us. I just wanted him to, it's his job to. It is not his job to hold your dog, the older gentleman said, and this time he said it loudly and clearly, and his voice did not shake. And it is certainly not his job to be struck in the face. You should be ashamed. She rounded on him. "Mind your own business. Do you know who I?" "No," he said, "and I find I don't care." "I tell you," a small cheer went up. Quiet, almost embarrassed, the kind of sound English crowds make when they have decided collectively that they are on the side of the right and are slightly startled to find themselves saying so out loud. But the guard did not acknowledge it. The cheer was not for him, in a sense, because he was not in the business of being cheered. He had a post and he was standing it, and a thin line of blood was now reaching the line of his jaw, and his eyes had not moved from their point above us. And that, the not moving, the sheer unhurried refusal to be drawn, was a more complete answer than any cheer could be. What I did not know, standing there, was that the answer had already been set in motion. I learned the rest afterward in pieces, from the news and from a man who turned out to be standing in the gatehouse, and I will tell it to you the way I came to understand it, because the discipline I watched on the steps was only the visible part of a larger discipline, and the larger one is the part that matters. The guard's name was Daniel Aldous. He was 31 years old and he had been standing public duty for 4 years. And before that he had served 2 tours in places I will not pretend to know the geography of, and he had a young son and a wife who, I am told, watched the video the next morning with her hand pressed over her mouth and then said, "That's exactly him. That's exactly what he'd do." He stood the kind of post that looks, to a visitor, like the easiest job in the world. Stand there, look impressive, let the tourists photograph you. It is not the easiest job in the world. It is one of the hardest. Because the whole skill of it, the entire trained core of it, is the capacity to receive provocation, heckling, mockery, jostling, the occasional genuine assault, and to return nothing, to hold the line not with force but with the refusal to be moved from it. The stillness is not the absence of a reaction. The stillness is the reaction. It is the most disciplined thing a man can do, and it is invisible to exactly the kind of person who most needs to see it. There is a protocol for what just happened. There is always a protocol. That is the whole point of an institution like that one. A sentry who is interfered with, who is assaulted, does not break his post to grapple with the offender. That is precisely what the offender wants, the spectacle of the toy soldier turned human, and it is precisely what the institution will not give. Instead, he holds. And the system around him, which is far larger and far less still than he is, moves on his behalf. There were eyes on that forecourt that the woman never saw. There was a sentry post in the gatehouse with a clear line of sight. There were 2 officers of the police detail who patrolled the perimeter, and who had clocked the rising voice a full minute before the bag came off her shoulder. The moment the blow landed, the moment that flat crack carried across the stone, a quiet machinery that had been idling came smoothly up to speed. But Daniel Aldous did not know who was watching or how fast they would come. He knew only the thing he had been trained to know, which is that his job in that instant was to remain exactly what he was, a still red figure at the foot of the steps, bleeding a little, asking for nothing, conceding nothing. And he did it. He did it while a woman who had hit him in the face stood 2 feet away and tried, in front of a growing crowd and a dozen cameras, to construct a version of events in which she was the wronged party. Because that is what she did next. I watched it happen and I could hardly believe it. Having struck him, having drawn blood, having been told to her face by a stranger that she should be ashamed, she did not retreat. People like that do not, in my experience, retreat. They reframe. She straightened up, she set her shoulders, and she pointed at the guard's bleeding face as though it were evidence against him. "He provoked me," she announced to the crowd, to the air. "You all saw it. He stood there ignoring me deliberately. That's harassment, that's aggressive behavior. A woman alone, and he just, anyone would have. I felt threatened. I felt genuinely threatened by his behavior." I have replayed that sentence more times than I can count, and what astonishes me about it is not that it was a lie. Of course it was a lie. We had all just watched the truth. What astonishes me is that I think she half believed it. In the world she lived in, the world where other people were functions and conveniences, The guard's failure to function as she demanded genuinely was a kind of aggression against her. His refusal to be furniture felt to her like an assault. She had spent her whole life with the volume of the world tuned to her, and a man who would not turn that dial had done her a violence she could not name. So she named it the only thing she knew: harassment, threat, the wronged woman. And she said it loudly, and she said it for the cameras, and I watched a few people near the back, who had not seen the blow land, actually hesitate and glance at the bleeding statue with a flicker of new doubt. That was the moment I understood that stillness alone might not be enough. The truth was on every phone in the forecourt. But the truth, I was learning, is not self-evident to a crowd. It needs a witness. And the institution that stood behind Daniel Aldis was about to provide one, several in fact. But first the man himself had one more thing to hold against, and it was the hardest thing of all. It was the assistant. The young woman who had been handed the dog and the bags, who had stood through all of it with her shoulders curled in and her eyes on the cobbles, the way people stand when they have learned that being noticed by their employer is never good news. The little dog had begun to struggle in her arms, frightened by the shouting, by the strange tall figures, by the crowd, and it twisted hard and got a paw free, and the assistant, trying to keep hold of it and the 4 heavy bags at once, stumbled forward against the cordon. One of the bags split. Something glass inside it broke on the stone with a bright tinkling sound. The woman turned on her. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea that was pick it up, what is wrong with you?" And she raised her hand. Not the bag this time. Her hand flat, drawn back, and the assistant flinched and ducked her head and pulled the trembling dog against her chest. And for one ugly second the whole forecourt saw exactly what kind of woman we were dealing with, saw it without any doubt at all. Because the cruelty she had aimed at a statue, she was now aiming at a person who could feel it. And that was when Daniel Aldis moved. I want to be careful, because the way it has been described in some places makes it sound like more than it was, and the truth is more impressive than the exaggeration. He did not lunge. He did not strike. What he did was take one single measured step, a guardsman's step, sharp and squared, the kind they drill 10,000 times, that brought his tall red bulk and the long line of the rifle squarely between the woman's raised hand and the cowering girl. He did not touch the woman. He did not even look at her. He simply, with the full deliberate weight of his training, interposed himself, and brought his boot down on the cobbles with a crack that was louder than the bag had been, and stood there. A wall, a barrier, a statue that had moved exactly 1 pace and no further, now positioned so that there was no path between the woman and the girl that did not go through him. The hand came down, not on the girl. The woman lowered it because there was suddenly a regiment in the way of it, an immovable red certainty that had appeared between her cruelty and its target, and even she understood in her body what her mind would not admit, that she had run into something she could not move, could not buy, could not shout down, and would not get past. "You can't touch me," she said to him, but her voice had gone thin. You're not allowed to touch me. That's the rule. You can't touch members of the public." He had not touched her. He never did. That, I think, is the genius of it and the discipline of it, and I have turned it over so many times since. He answered the only assault he could lawfully and rightly answer, the one about to land on a defenseless person, and he answered it not with violence but with the one thing she had been trying all morning to provoke and could not stand to actually receive: his presence, fully and finally directed at her. He gave her, at last, the reaction she had demanded, and the reaction was a wall. It was at that exact moment that the system arrived. I had not seen them coming because I, like everyone, was watching the steps. But they had been moving for a full minute, smooth and unhurried and entirely certain, and now they were simply there. 2 officers of the police detail in their dark uniforms, and behind them, coming down the steps with the unmistakable bearing of a man whose word ends conversations, a sergeant of the guard in his own red and gold, older than Aldis, gray at the temples, with a face like a closed door. The relief, I would learn, had been signaled the instant the blow landed. A second guardsman stepping smartly out from the side post to take over Aldous' ground, so that the institution lost not 1 inch of its watch even as it gathered itself to act. The sergeant did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He came to a halt a precise distance from the woman, and the police officers flanked her, and the older gentleman with the newspaper said to them before anyone asked, "I saw all of it. She struck him across the face with that bag, cut him. Unprovoked, I'll give my name." And around him like a wave the rest of us found our voices. "So did I, it's all on my phone. I've got it from the front, you can see the whole thing." A young woman near me was already turning her screen toward the nearest officer. The crowd that the woman had counted on to be furniture, the same way she had counted on the guard, had become something else. Witnesses. A wall of them, every bit as immovable as the one in the red tunic. "Madam," the sergeant said, and his voice was so level, so entirely without anger, that it was somehow worse than shouting. "These officers are going to need to speak with you." "He started it," she said. "He provoked me. I was threatened. I'm the victim here. Look at how he's standing. Look at how aggressive. I want him removed. I want his name. I'll have his job. Do you understand me? I will have his." "You struck a sentry on duty in the face," the sergeant said, "in front of perhaps 50 witnesses and as many cameras, and a moment ago you raised your hand to that young woman, which these officers also saw. The guardsman did not touch you. He stepped between you and her. That is what he is for." He paused. "You are not the victim here, madam. I'd encourage you to stop saying that you are, because every person on this forecourt watched what happened, and so, by now, has a good part of the country." She looked around. I saw it land. I saw the exact instant the architecture of her certainty came down, when she understood that there were not going to be private words and a quiet apology and a manager smoothing it all over, that there was no one here whose deference she could draw on, that the man she had hit had won not by hitting back, but by standing still while she destroyed herself in front of the only audience that would ever matter to her, the one with the cameras. Her mouth opened and closed. The fight went out of her in stages, like air from a slow puncture, and what was left underneath was something I almost pitied. A woman who had finally been told no and could not understand the language it was spoken in. The little dog had stopped struggling. The assistant stood holding it, and one of the officers said something kind to her quietly, and she nodded and the tears came, the way they do when someone is gentle with you after a long time of no one being gentle at all. Daniel Aldous, his one measured step complete, his ground now held by the relieving guardsman beside him, had begun to withdraw. He turned that sharp, beautiful, drilled turn and marched, blood drying on his cheek, back toward the gatehouse and whatever came next for him there. And he did not look back. And he did not look at the cameras. And he did not look at the woman. And the not looking was, I swear to you, the most dignified thing I have ever seen a human being do. The arrest itself was a small thing, almost an anticlimax. The officers did not drag her anywhere. They did not need to. One of them spoke to her quietly, and the words assault and common assault. And you do not have to say anything, carried just far enough for those of us at the front to hear. And her face did a complicated thing as the meaning arrived, first disbelief, then outrage, then finally the dawning understanding that the world she lived in did not, in fact, extend to this stone forecourt and these red uniforms and these patient, unimpressed officers of the law. She said something about her solicitor. She said something about a misunderstanding. She said something about how she had given a great deal of money to a great many things, and that this would all be sorted out by people far more important than anyone standing here. And the officer, to his eternal credit, simply waited until she had finished, and then said, "That's fine, madam. You can tell all of that to the duty sergeant at the station." And she went with them because there was nothing else left in the world for her to do. I should tell you what happened to her bags because it stayed with me. The assistant, the young woman, gathered them up, all four and the broken one, and the trembling dog tucked into the crook of her arm, and she carried them after her employer toward the gate with that same curled-in posture. And I thought, watching her go, that she would probably lose her job over this, or quit it, and that either way she was the one person in the whole affair who had done nothing wrong and would pay for it the longest. I have since heard, and I cannot verify it, so I offer it only as the kind of small grace one hopes is true, that she did not go back, that she handed the dog and the bags to the officers, gave her name as a witness, said her piece, and walked out of that woman's employment and that woman's life that very afternoon. I hope it is true. There is no part of this story I want to be true more than that one. The video was everywhere by nightfall. I do not say that lightly. I had filmed things before, the way everyone films things now, little moments that get a few likes from people I know and then sink. This was not that. By the time I got home and sat down with a cup of tea and opened my phone, the forecourt of Halden House had been viewed by more people than live in my city, and by morning the number was a figure I genuinely could not hold in my head. There were a dozen angles, mine, and the young father's, and the older gentleman's, and a clear high one from someone who must have been standing on the base of the railing. You could watch it from any side, and the story was the same from every one of them, which is the thing about the truth when 50 people record it at once. It does not have a soft side, an angle that flatters the offender. There was the snap of the finger in his face. There was the dog and the bags and the open contempt. There was the bag drawn back over the shoulder and swung with full force, and the crack, and the line of red. And there was the man who did not move. Over and over in every version, the man who did not move. The headlines, when they came, did not call him a hero, and I was glad of that because I do not think he was one, not in the loud sense the word usually means. He had not done anything heroic. He had done his job. The remarkable thing, the thing that moved a country of strangers to watch a 30-second video 40 million times, was precisely that he had done his job perfectly under a pressure most of us cannot imagine, and that his perfect ordinary discipline had, all on its own, been enough. He had not needed to fight her. He had not needed to defend himself, or shout her down, or even speak. He had simply been, with total commitment, the thing he was, a disciplined man at his post. And it turned out that a disciplined man at his post, struck in the face by an entitled stranger and refusing to be drawn, is one of the most powerful images a tired and cynical public can be shown. People wrote that it restored something in them. A man I will never meet wrote, under my own video, that he had served 30 years ago and had forgotten until that morning why the uniform had mattered to him, and that he had wept at his kitchen table watching a boy young enough to be his son hold a line he himself had once held. I read that, and I will admit I had to put the phone down for a while. As for the woman, the country was less kind to her than I think was strictly necessary, and I have mixed feelings about that part even now. Her name came out because names always come out. The places she was known, the boards she sat on. Within 48 hours, 2 of those boards had asked her to step down, and a charity whose galas she had hosted released a careful statement about not being able to associate itself. And the great machinery of money and access that she had been so certain would sort it all out turned out to work in exactly the opposite direction. It does not protect you when 50 cameras have caught you striking a soldier in the face. It abandons you, swiftly and with great public concern for its own reputation, and leaves you standing alone in precisely the place you were always most afraid of standing, unseen, unwanted, of no use to anyone. I do not celebrate that. I think there is something in all of us that should be uneasy at the speed with which a crowd turns. But I will not pretend she did not earn the turning. She struck a man who would not strike back, and raised her hand to a girl who could not defend herself, and she did it for a photograph. The consequence was not luck. It was the simple arithmetic of being seen at last, exactly as she had always been by everyone, all at once. And the charge stood. That mattered to me, that it was not just the noise of the internet which fades, but the quiet permanence of the law which does not. She was charged with common assault, and in the fullness of time, in a courtroom far less dramatic than the forecourt, she pleaded through the solicitor she had been so confident in, and the matter was dealt with. A conviction, a fine that meant nothing to her purse and everything to her name, and in order to stay clear of the forecourt and the man she had struck. A small sentence in the scheme of things, but it was the right size. It was proportionate. It matched the wrong exactly, the way the guard's single step had matched exactly the harm it prevented, and not 1 inch more. The whole affair, I came to feel, was a study in proportion. Her wild swing of a heavy bag against his single squared step, her shouted lies against his unbroken silence, her certainty that the world bent around her against the cold, flat fact that, here, it did not. I went back to Halden House 3 weeks later. I'm not entirely sure why. I told my wife I wanted to see the forecourt again, see it ordinary, and that was true. But underneath it, I think I wanted to know that the world had not been permanently knocked off its axis by what I had seen, that the steps were still there, that the sentries still stood them, that a man could be struck in the face by a stranger, and the great calm machinery of the place would simply close over the wound and carry on. I suppose I wanted reassurance that discipline was not a brittle thing, that it had survived contact with that woman's chaos. So I went. It was a gray, mild afternoon, far fewer visitors than the day of the bags, and the forecourt was exactly as it had always been. The carved lions on the gateposts, the pale, wide face of the house, the broad stone steps, and at the foot of them, in the red tunic and the tall black bearskin, white gloves crossed on the rifle, eyes fixed on a point above all our heads, stood a sentry. I will be honest, I do not know for certain that it was him. The whole point of the uniform, the whole genius of it, is that it makes one disciplined man indistinguishable from the next, that the institution speaks and not the individual. But I stood at the railing for a long while, and the sentry's left cheek caught the gray light, and there was a faint mark there, a thin healed line, just where the metal clasp had bitten, and I chose to believe it was him. I think it was him. Daniel Aldous, back at his post, 3 weeks on, doing precisely the thing he had been doing the morning a woman swung a bag at his head, as though nothing in the world had happened, because as far as his duty was concerned, nothing had. The provocation had come, and the provocation had gone, and the post remained, and so did he. A small girl was standing near me at the railing, holding her father's hand, looking up at the still red figure with the open wonder children have. "Daddy," she said, "why doesn't he move?" The father crouched down to her level the way good fathers do. "Because that's his job, love," he said. "He stands very still and he guards the house, and he doesn't move no matter what, because that's how everyone knows the house is safe. It's a very hard job, harder than it looks." Harder than it looks, I repeated to myself under my breath, and I thought, yes, that is the whole of it. That is the thing the woman never understood, and the thing the country understood all at once. From the railing it looks like the easiest thing in the world to stand still, to do nothing, to let the day flow past you. It is the hardest thing in the world. It is harder than swinging a bag. It is harder than shouting. It is harder than throwing your money and your name and your certainty at a problem until it goes away. To stand still under provocation, to receive an insult and a blow and a lie and return nothing but the steady fact of your own discipline, that is not the absence of strength. It is strength refined down to its purest form, the strength that does not need to prove itself because it has nothing to prove, the strength that wins precisely by refusing to fight on the terms the weak and the cruel set for it. I have thought since about why that 30-second video moved so many millions of strangers, and I have come to believe it is this: we live in a loud time. We are taught every day in 100 small ways that the answer to provocation is more provocation, that the way to win is to be louder and angrier and quicker to take offense, that the man who does not react is a man who has lost. And then, for 30 seconds, a great many of us watched a man prove all of that wrong. We watched a man be wronged in the most public way imaginable and decline, with total composure, to be made small by it. And something in us, something tired, something hungry, something that remembers a different idea of what it means to be a man, and could not have told you it remembered until that moment, something in us stood up. He did not move, and so we did. The woman, I am told, has not been seen at any of her old places. The dog, I like to imagine, went with the assistant, though I have no way to know. The video is still out there and will be, I suppose, forever, which is a strange kind of justice, that her single worst moment, the one she would give anything to take back, is preserved against her will for all time, while his was over the instant he marched back through the gate and was simply replaced, the next day, by the same disciplined nothing he offered every other day. She wanted to be remembered. She is. He did not care whether he was. He is too. I left the railing as the light was going. The sentry stood. The healed line on his cheek caught the last of the gray afternoon, and then he was just a red figure at the foot of the steps again. One of many, interchangeable, anonymous, exactly as the institution intends. I will not pretend he saw me, or that there was some final glance between us, because there was not, and a glance would have spoiled it, would have made him a man performing for a witness, which is precisely the thing he had refused to be for the woman with the bag. But I raised my hand to him anyway, the small private salute of a civilian who does not know how, and I turned and walked out through the gate where the carved lions watched, and I carried the whole of it home with me, and I have carried it ever since. He did not move that morning, when the world told him he should. He did not move when she snapped her fingers in his face, or dumped her bags against his sleeve, or stood 2 feet away and demanded he look at her, or swung a heavy bag at his head and cut him to the bone. He moved exactly once, one squared and deliberate step, and only when a person who could not protect herself needed a wall between her and harm. And in that one step, and in the perfect stillness on either side of it, I think I finally saw the thing I had gone to the palace that morning hoping to see and had not known how to name. Not a statue, and not a soldier, but a man who had made himself so completely the master of when he would, and would not move that nothing on earth could move him against his will. The woman thought that made him furniture. It made him the only truly free person on that whole forecourt. She had all the money and all the certainty and all the noise, and she could not move one quiet man 1 inch. He had a post, and a uniform, and a thin line of his own blood drying on his cheek, and he had everything that mattered. That is the whole story. I have told it as plainly as I can, and I have left nothing out, and if you ever find yourself at the railing of some great house watching a still red figure who will not so much as glance your way, I hope you will remember it, and I hope you will understand, as that good father told his small daughter in the gray light, that it is a very hard job, harder than it looks, the hardest there is, and that the men who do it well are doing, in plain sight and asking nothing for it, the bravest ordinary thing I have ever been lucky enough to witness.